Many Trump supporters feel that Donald Trump is an honest, direct, straightforward, truthful man, exposing the lies and corruption in the deep state of American politics and government. Let's analyze his birth chart and see if that analysis supports this opinion or not. Since the subject here is basically truth, is he truthful? Let's start the analysis by looking at 3 points which are classically associated with truthfulness. That would be the 2 planets described as Brahmins in classical Vedic astrology, which is Jupiter and Venus, and also the planet that owns the 9th house, which is the house of honesty. In Donald Trump's chart, Jupiter is definitely an extremely influential planet. And this is mostly because it strongly influences his first lord. He has Jupiter in Libra. Libra is definitely a sign that has potential for truth. Libra is known as a liberal sign, the cognate. It's a sign about justice, fairness, truth. Even more to the point than that, Trump's Jupiter is in the nakshatra called Chitra. Chitra is described in the Taittiriya Brahmana as being ṛtam prastat satyam avastat. The words ṛtam and satyam both have to do with truth. So right off the bat, our analysis of his chart looks like, yeah, man, this guy is into the truth. He has Jupiter in Libra and in Chitra. So no wonder this concept of him as a person who works against the dishonesty and corruption in Washington is widespread. And also, no wonder he has a good base of support amongst very religious people, because Jupiter is priestly and religious. However, you might be scratching your head, because this guy's not a liberal. In fact, he and his supporters take a great deal of delight in how extremely anti-liberal they can be. So you might be scratching your head as to why he has a prominent planet in Libra, the liberal sign. So if you look carefully at this Jupiter, there is a big but involved, and everybody likes big buts. This big but is the retrogression of Jupiter. And in fact, this particular retrogression in Donald Trump's chart is at a station at the very apex of its retrogression. So you could call this an apex retrogression. How will you interpret retrogression? In general, we're always advised by classical sources to treat retrogression as being opposite of what it seems, because the motion of the planet is opposite to the way it usually goes. In practice, the interpretation of a retrogression is kind of difficult and context sensitive, and you shouldn't always interpret the retrogression in the specific place that it happens. For example, if it's happening at the end of the sign and the planet's turning back into the sign or the nakshatra, or if it's at the beginning and the planet is trying to leave, it makes quite a bit of difference. In Trump's case, even if we just apply the general classical rule that retrogression is the opposite of what it seems, it certainly is a figure that's very connected with truth, because it has a prominent Jupiter in Libra and Chitra, but it's retrogression, so it's actually the opposite of what it seems. From which you could maybe jump to a conclusion and say, well, I guess he's actually the epitome of untruth. Now, if you apply a little bit more sophistication to the classical principle and notice that the retrogression in his case happens right after it has entered Chitra. So Jupiter is turning around and trying to leave Chitra and get back into Hasta. Then you can interpret that as meaning it's not really comfortable being in this situation. It wants to leave this very truthy situation and return to Hasta, which is a place where things are more the way you want them to be, or the way you could arrange them, the way you could manipulate them. So one very important thing that you should all know from the start is you should never come to any conclusion about a person or a chart based on only one thing in the chart. The jury is still out, and it's really far out, actually, because on one hand we have Jupiter in Chitra and Libra. The guy is all about truth and honesty and morals. But on the other hand, it's retrogressing at its apex, trying to leave the situation most indicative of that honesty and truth and morality. So the jury is out. What we definitely know for sure is that he's definitely very connected to truth and honesty. But whether it is what it seems or not is still something that we have to look at the rest of the chart to resolve. Now let's turn our attention to the next Brahmana in classical Vedic astrology, and that is Venus. Venus is associated to truth because it's about beauty also. Femininity is beauty, beauty is perception, perception is about truth. What you observe, what's observable. His Venus is in the 12th house, and it's in the sign of Cancer. So the 12th house is the part of the sky where the sun is after it has risen. So it's at the angle in which it really streams into your eyes, similar to the 8th house. And so therefore it is associated with things that are difficult to perceive, things that are mysterious or invisible. So to have Venus in the 12th house suggests that it would be difficult to perceive Donald Trump's Venus. And this is quite accurate, really, because people are confused. So on one hand, everybody thinks this guy's an outright liar. And on the other hand, everybody thinks this guy is the truest, most honest president that we've ever had. It's in Cancer. It makes it even more mysterious and confusing because Cancer is underwater, it's deep and private. So one thing you could certainly know about Donald Trump, to put it in symbolic language, is that Venus is not easy to find in this guy. Now what does Venus represent? At the core, Venus represents femininity. Femininity involves things like cooperation, togetherness, empathy, and love. Indeed, it's very difficult to see Trump cooperating or promoting togetherness or having empathy or showing a lot of affection and love. The only case where we find that to be a bit different is how he relates to his children, which also goes along with the Cancer theme of motherhood. Now, another thing about Donald Trump's Venus that you'll notice is that it's very close to Saturn. In fact, it's 2 degrees away from Saturn. What does Saturn represent? Saturn represents reduction and pragmatism. Saturn is a truthy planet, but not in the sense of a lofty truth. Saturn is a truthy planet in the sense of what's practical, what's real, what's touchable, what's tangible. Having Saturn very close to Venus is another simple indicator of a reduction or a stiffening of the femininity. So to have Saturn here next to Venus, it's going to make Venus's sense of truth more towards what works and what's pragmatic. So after analyzing the Jupiter and Venus in Trump's chart, we really are not so sure about whether this guy really is a truth champion or is just a manipulator. We really have to investigate the rest of the chart. And one thing I want to bring to your attention right now is also in this 12th house. It's Mercury. And it's not only in the 12th house, Cancer, which is difficult for Mercury, but it's also in Ardra, which is a nakshatra of struggle. Now, this is easy to see in Trump because he has great difficulty with language and communication. I'm sorry to phrase it that way for the Trump supporters, but he doesn't speak at a very educated level. He speaks at a very simple level, and his sentences kind of break and get disjointed, and he doesn't have like a clear continuum in his speech, and therefore it's kind of difficult to understand what he's saying. So that's another thing to consider here, because Mercury is not really a planet that has anything to do with truth, but it has to do with expression. And so what we can understand from his Mercury is that, well, it's difficult for him to communicate clearly, and that's going to add to the confusion or the fuzziness around what he says. Now, let's take a look at the third point. We wanted to look at Jupiter and Venus because they're Brahminical, they concern themselves with truth. And also we want to look at the ninth lord because the ninth house is concerned with truth and honesty. Trump's ninth lord is Mars, and that Mars is right on his ascendant. It's 3 degrees away from his ascendant. So what we got here is another indication similar to Jupiter. Jupiter in Libra, Chitra, this guy is about truth. Ninth lord is right on the ascendant. He's about truth. So no wonder he has thousands of people saying that this guy is a champion of truth. And he's draining the swamp, and he's getting rid of all the corruption. Now, in fact, this Mars on his ascendant, at 3 degrees away from his ascendant, is really the main feature in his chart, and it's the interpretations that you can derive from this Mars are going to be more important than the interpretations that you can derive from the other planets in the chart because of the prominence of it. So the things that we're about to say now are going to take precedence over the things that we say about Jupiter and Venus. What's very interesting to note side by side is to compare the prominence and dominance of his Mars versus the obscurity of his Venus. So since Mars fundamentally represents masculinity and Venus fundamentally represents femininity, what you can take away from this is he's very masculine and very not feminine. Furthermore, his Mars is in Leo, which is one of the most masculine signs. And it's in MAGA Chart, which is one of the most masculine nakshatras belonging to the Pitri, the fathers. So take this Mars and compare it to his Venus in the 12th house Cancer next to Saturn. You got a stiffened and obscured femininity versus a prominent, dominant, strong, fully aligned masculinity. So all the traits of masculinity will be very obvious and dominant in Donald Trump, and all the traits of femininity will be very well hidden. What are some of the traits of masculinity? The first thing I'll mention is independence. Masculinity is self-reliant and independent. So in Donald Trump, he's very obviously a maverick. He's very independent. He belongs to the Republican Party, technically, but he doesn't even cooperate with the Republican Party, and they don't even cooperate much with him. He's really an independent. He's really a maverick. He's very different from the rest. Everybody will say that. His haters will say that. His lovers will say that. He's different from everybody else. That's what Mars does. Mars is independent. It does its own thing. It's very different. Mars is a soloist, and so is he. Another trait of masculinity is strength. Femininity has beauty, masculinity has strength. So this is another thing that's very obvious to see in Donald Trump, is that he's all about strength. There's a protest. He doesn't meet it with reconciliation. He meets it with force. Another trait of masculinity is ambition. So that's another thing in Trump which is very obvious. His degree of ambition is phenomenal. He's not even a politician, but he runs for president of the United States. Super ambitious person. Similar to ambition is passion. If we take ambition and passion, and then if we have some of the benefit of understanding yoga, the yoga darshan, because yoga is all about perceiving truth. And the key thing of yoga is to achieve neutrality and to diminish passion and ambition. Because passion and ambition, or rajaguna, it distorts the truth and makes it something that is self-serving. So the nature of a person with a very dominant Mars is not going to be objectively true. It's going to be strongly passionate about one's personal perception of the truth. And what I'd finally like to mention about masculinity is that masculinity is quick and confident and assertive and bold. So you can see this very easily in Trump. He's quick. He speaks constantly. He's always tweeting. He speaks whatever on his mind with full confidence. He doesn't worry if it's going to cause him a problem. He doesn't worry if it's going to be complicated. He just does it. He doesn't need to be careful. Hold this up next to his prominent Jupiter and keep in mind the fact that Mars is his ninth lord. And it's easy to understand why people feel that he's an agent of truth. He's a savior. He's a truth man. It's because if you're really careful about what you say and you measure all your words, then people will think that you're lying about something. Why do you have to be so careful about what you say? Just speak. And that's exactly what Trump does. He just talks. Now, since we're here talking about his Mars, let's take the opportunity to move the discussion to his ascendant. The ascendant is a point in the chart which is relevant to every topic and is important in every chart. So this is a very important discussion to have as well. His ascendant is in Leo. Some people are going to say, well, look, Leo is very truthful. That's a misunderstanding of the sign Leo. Leo is very manly. It belongs to the sun and it's a fire sign. It's a very manly sign. So therefore it's very confident and decisive and has no problem being extroverted. And again, we have this same dynamic here where our natural instinct is to interpret extroverted decisive confidence as truth, but actually it's extroverted decisive confidence. So our instinct is to interpret that as honesty, and it is honesty. But our instinct is to equate honesty with truth, which it may not be. He's honest to his perception of the truth, but maybe not to an objective perception of the truth. The ascendant is not only in Leo, but it's in the nakshatra of MAGA. Now, there is something very special about Donald Trump's particular ascendant. It's not just in MAGA. It's exactly in MAGA. And the basis for saying that it's exactly in MAGA is that it's exactly conjoined to the Yogatar, or the anchoring star of MAGA, which in Vedic terminology is called MAGA, but in the Western world, the Greek nomenclature is Regulus. So you could not get more of a MAGA than Donald Trump. What's MAGA? MAGA, first of all, is very manly, just like Leo and just like Mars. Why is it manly? Because it belongs to Pitris, the fathers. MAGA also has to do, since it has to do with fathers, it has to do with power. And since it has to do with fathers, it has to do with inheritance. Trump, that's what his thing is. He inherited all his power from his father. He inherited all his money from his father. In fact, he probably inherited most of his personality from his father. Now, MAGA, because it belongs to fathers and forefathers, is traditional and conservative. This is going to support our indication about Jupiter in Libra retrograde. The ascendant is in a strongly conservative nakshatra, and even the sign Leo is also on the conservative side. And so for the Jupiter, which is in Libra, has to bend to its retrogressive nature and become anti-liberal. On top of this, if you analyze carefully and if you know about the way the planets form their camps in relation to the Sun, Saturn, Mercury, and Venus all form one camp together because they are kind of intrinsically opposed to the hierarchical, structural, dominant governance nature of the Sun. So Trump has all three of those planets tucked away in the 12th house. So this guy definitely is not a liberal. MAGA is very much about power and rule. The Greek nomenclature for MAGA is Regulus, which is cognate to our English word regulate, which means to rule and control. And sure enough, Trump presents himself as your president of law and order. He does have a sense of patriotism because of the MAGA ascendant being connected with forefathers and fatherland. So his country is wound up in his sense of self. So look at the situation here. You have Mars in Leo with the ascendant in MAGA. Mars is individualistic. Leo is all about the self. Ascendant is all about the self. MAGA is about power. So, is he a truth man? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but it's definitely not the primary thing about this guy. The primary thing about Donald Trump, his primary characteristic, is his ambition to acquire power for himself. Now, before we finish an analysis of the chart, anybody's chart, you also always have to look at the moon. The moon and the ascendant you always have to look at in relation to any topic. His moon is in Sagittarius, bingo. Again, it's like no wonder he stands out as being a truthy person. Sagittarius is about truth. Jupiter is in Libra and it's prominent. Sagittarius moon, he's a truth man. But, another nice big but, is that this moon is eclipsed with Ketu in Sagittarius. What does eclipse signify? Eclipse signifies kind of like a retrogression or some radical difference, some radical change, quick change. Especially the Ketu side of the eclipse is like a subversive or subliminal or a hidden or confusing kind of a change. So what you could take away from this is his subjective nature, his moon, is not cooperative at all, and it's radical and subversive. Especially in connection with his prominence of his Mars, he's going to be the norm defier. So since everybody knows politicians are self-serving bastards, if Trump comes across as the norm defier, then we're going to think he must not be a self-serving bastard. But maybe that's jumping to conclusions. Maybe that's not the particular part of politicians that he defies the norms of. Maybe it's the statesmanship and culture of the politicians that he defies the norms of. Since we have an eclipsed moon, eclipsed by Ketu in Sagittarius, Sagittarius is a sign of information and truth. And Ketu is confusion and the eclipse is strange things. So no doubt he's going to like conspiracy theories, strange versions of the truth. He's going to promote conspiracy theories. And he himself probably believes, or at least doesn't disbelieve, the conspiracy theories. Now the moon is well known to be particularly sensitive to its nakshatra, so let's think about the nakshatra that this eclipsed Ketu moon is in. It's in Jyeshtha. Jyeshtha is all about politics, provocation, and counter-provocation. If you take a Jyeshtha moon and hold it up with a MAGA ascendant, some bells are going to go off, some light bulbs are going to go off for you. MAGA nakshatra is all about power, regulation, dominance, control. Jyeshtha, the word itself literally means the best. It's all about superiority and excellence and the effort to climb the ladder and become the best and to maintain yourself in that position. That's what he's primarily interested in. Whether or not he drains the swamp is secondary. The main thing that he cares about is whether or not he gets elected. And you may say in that sense he's no different than any politician, but he is. The drasticness of this is how he differs. One quick PS, you might think, why did you not mention his sun? It's the first lord. The sun is eclipsed, so it's basically the same as the moon, and also it's in the 11th house, which is personal gain. And also it's in Mrigashirsha, a very finessey nakshatra, delicate nakshatra, and it's in Gemini, a very finessey, delicate sign, but it's the sun, a big, bold, masculine figure. So this confirms how he's not really a finesse person. So what can we conclude about Donald Trump after analyzing his chart? Mars in this chart shows us that he's definitely bold, assertive, and direct, and independent in his plans and ambitions. So you're going to find him being a person that's unwilling to have anybody else's help. He's going to break away from groups and things like that. And the prominence of MAGA and Jyeshtha as the ascendant and moon nakshatra show us that his main characteristic is to be dominant and imposing and intimidating and superior to others. That's what he's really all about. He's bold. Look at his ascendant configuration, how masculine it is. And he's got lack of finesse. Mercury, look at his Mercury configuration. Vocal finesse is lacking, or any kind of finesse. So you're not going to get the sense that he's hiding anything. You're going to get the sense that he's totally open. But his primary concern is self. And everything else is secondary. And what he really wants to do is get what he wants. And what people mistake as truth is his honesty and his unrehearsed self-confidence and lack of verbal finesse.